Hi. Respiration is a broader process. It contains various events. What are the events of respiration? There are 5 events of respiration out there. One is breathing. First event is called as breathing or pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation. Second one is internal respiration. Internal respiration. And it's followed by transport of respiratory gases. Means oxygen or carbon dioxide as the case may be. Clear. Next one is followed by internal respiration. Internal respiration also called as a tissue respiration. Tissue respiration. It's followed by cellular oxidation. Cellular oxidation. So these are the 5 events of respiration. Respiration is a broader process. The first process, what is that? Breathing. It happens to the lungs. So from the atmosphere into the lungs, oxygen is taken, and from lungs into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is released here, and that's called as breathing or pulmonary ventilation. Okay, students. It is followed by internal respiration. So once the lungs are having the oxygen, for example, they are entering into which one? Alveoli. They are entering into the alveoli, isn't it? So here, alveolar exchange of gases is there. Oxygen is taken and carbon dioxide is released here. Oxygen is taken, carbon dioxide is released here. So this exchange of gases in the alveolar capillaries. Alveolar capillaries means the blood vessels, smallest blood vessels in the alveoli, they are called as alveolar capillaries. The exchange of gases here, oxygen is taken into the alveoli. For example, this is the alveolus. Here oxygen is taken and carbon dioxide is released here. That is exchange of gases along the alveolus is called as internal respiration here. Internal respiration. Okay. So they are present in the alveolar capillaries. For example, oxygen is now present in the alveolar capillaries. It enters the blood circulation. So here, after this internal respiration, what is the next event? Transport of respiratory gases here. That is, for example, oxygen is now entering the alveolar capillaries during the internal respiration, and then it enters the general blood circulation. And there is a transport of respiratory gas here. We are taking example as which one? Oxygen, for example. Oxygen is transported via blood. Transport of gases here. For example, oxygen transport. Oxygen is transported here to the cells here. And here the tissue spaces here. These are the cells which here comprises the tissue. And these are called as the tissue spaces. What are these called as the tissue spaces? Tissue spaces. So oxygen is now entering into the tissue spaces. So there is exchange of gases here at the tissues. That's called as tissue respiration. Also called as internal respiration here. So exchange of gases at the tissues is called as a tissue respiration or internal respiration here. So from the tissue spaces, it is entering into which one? Oxygen. For example, this is a cell. What is this one? Cell. So from the tissue, this is a tissue space. From the tissue space, oxygen is entering through the plasma membrane into the cell. Here is a cytoplasm. The cytoplasm contains the mitochondria, isn't it? So oxygen is taken by mitochondria. And there the cellular oxidation takes place here. That is, glucose molecule is destroyed here, degraded. C6H12O6, we have already discussed, isn't it? And in the presence of oxygen and water, it is that is glucose molecule is oxidize. Why? Because this degradation of glucose molecule, breaking down of this glucose molecule is happening in the presence of oxygen and water, and that's why it's called as a oxidation. Why? Because this breaking down of the glucose molecule is occurring in the presence of oxygen, and that's why it's called as cellular oxidation here, which takes place, for example, in mitochondrial here the Krebs cycle takes place here, mitochondrial matrix here, that is called as cellular oxidation. As a result of cellular oxidation, what is released here? Carbon dioxide and ATP are released here, adenosine triphosphate and carbon dioxide released here. Once the carbon dioxide is released into the tissue spaces, the same reverse process happens here. So here, reverse process here, after cellular oxidation, what is released here? Carbon dioxide is released here, and this carbon dioxide is mixing in the tissue spaces, and it is transported by which one? Transport of respiratory gases by the blood, and here internal respiration, that is alveolar exchange of gases. Again here the carbon dioxide is released out into the atmosphere during the exhalation or expiration here. Okay, students. So this is a two-way process here. Oxygen is entering here and carbon dioxide is exiting out. Oxygen is entering in this direction and carbon dioxide is exiting in this direction, reverse direction here. This two-way process is happening because of the 5 events of respiration. These are the 5 events of respiration. Clear? I told you that the breathing is also called as pulmonary ventilation. How this happens? What is the mechanism involved? Let's discuss now. Clear, students? Okay, students, now the topic is mechanism of breathing. Mechanism of breathing, also called as pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary means because it happens to the lungs, that's why pulmonary ventilation, the exchange of gases between the lungs and the atmosphere. Here is called as the pulmonary ventilation or breathing here. Before discussion of the actual topic, let's go to the physics class. I repeat, physics class. So here, first of all, the area is inversely proportional to the pressure. What does it mean? When the area is decreasing, the pressure is increasing. When the area is increasing, the pressure is decreasing. Clear? That is reverse here. For example, take very simple experiment. All of you tighten your fist like this. Area is decreasing. So this is increasing. The area is decreasing here. That is pressure is increasing. Isn't it? That is when the area is decreasing, the pressure is increasing. The same way, reverse. When the area is increasing, the pressure is decreasing here. So area is inversely proportional to the pressure here. Number 2, diffusion. Diffusion. What is diffusion? Any gas moves from the region of the higher concentration to the lower concentration. Higher to the lower concentration is called as diffusion. When you spray the deodorant or perfume, it is going to the neighboring room. Why? Because your room where the deo is there, high concentration, it is moving to the neighboring room, that is lower concentration. It is nothing but diffusion of gases. So what is diffusion? When any gas moves or particles moves from the area region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration is called as diffusion. So area is inversely proportional to the pressure and diffusion. Okay, next one. Number 3. Intrapulmonary. You have to remember this point. Intrapulmonary. Anything pulmonary means which one? Related to the lungs. Intra. What is intra here? Inside. Inside the lungs. That's the meaning of intrapulmonary. Make a note there this here. Intrapulmonary means inside the lungs. Next one is gradient. Gradient means difference. What is the gradient? Difference. So there is a pressure gradient which is formed here. Pressure gradient. What is the pressure gradient? The pressure difference. There are two pressures over there. What is that? One is the atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure. Other is the intrapulmonary pressure. Intrapulmonary pressure. So there is a pressure difference between the atmospheric pressure and the intrapulmonary pressure. What is intrapulmonary pressure? The pressure inside the lungs. So a pressure gradient. What is pressure gradient here? A pressure difference is formed between the atmosphere and the lungs. That's called as the pressure gradient here. You're following, students? It's very easy, isn't it? So basing on this basic approach, let's discuss the mechanism of breathing here now. Now, what is the most important property of the muscles? Any muscle, they can contract and relax. That's the basic property of any muscle here. And the muscles are present here, but as the smooth muscles are present here, because this is the visceral organs, isn't it? The smooth muscles are present here. And anything diaphragm, I told you in the previous class, diaphragm is related with the phrenic. The phrenic means it is related, the term is related only to the diaphragm. Diaphragmatic muscles are called as the phrenic muscles. The diaphragm nerve is called as the phrenic nerve. The phrenic arteries, phrenic veins. So here phrenic muscles are present in the diaphragm. That's one. Next one, this is the one, for example. Next one is the ribs. Ribs are having the intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles. So where are the intercostal muscles present? They are present associated with the ribs. And these intercostal muscles are of two different types. External intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. So this is a basic approach. All of you make a note there. So overall, breathing involves, this is a breathing which involves two basic processes. One is called as a inspiration, also called as inhalation, and next one is a expiration, also called as exhalation. So two basic processes are there for the pulmonary ventilation or breathing bachon. Okay, what is inspiration and what is expiration, how they are affected, let's discuss now. I told you that there are two sets of muscles out there which are involved in the breathing. What is that? The muscles of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles of the ribs. What is the important property of the muscles? They contract and relax. This contraction and relaxation helps in the inspiration and expiration here. Okay, students. First of all, the phrenic muscles of diaphragm. How is the diaphragm bachon? Here are the lungs, for example. Here I'm not drawing total lungs diagram. This is the diaphragm. This is the diaphragm, for example. This is the diaphragm. Okay, it's a dome-shaped structure here, and this contains which muscles? Phrenic muscles. Phrenic muscles. What is the property of muscles? They contract. So phrenic muscles, they contract. The phrenic muscles, they contract here. When they contract, what happens? This is becoming flat. Actually, this is a dome-shaped structure, isn't it? Present below the lungs. And because of the contraction of these diaphragmatic muscles, phrenic muscles, this becomes like this here. They become flattened like this. It becomes flattened. That is, this is the original position. This becomes like this here. This area, as a result, this thoracic cavity is increased or decreased. This thoracic cavity is increased here in this direction. Which direction? Vertical direction. For example, this is a thoracic cavity. this is increased here in this direction here. That is the vertical lining in the antero-posterior axis of the thoracic cavity. It is increased. Why it is increased, bachon? Because the dome shape, actually this is the original position. It is becoming like this here because of the contraction of these phrenic muscles. As a result, the vertical axis of the thoracic cavity is increased. The antero-posterior axis of the thoracic lining is increased. So that is the net result, number one. Number two, what is the other muscle I told you? What is other muscle? Other is called as the intercostal muscles. Here, which muscles are involved? External intercostal muscles. External intercostal muscles of the ribs. Of the ribs. They also contract. They also contract. When they contract, what happens? The sternum and the ribs, they are moved towards they are elevated. The sternum and the ribs. What is sternum? The breastbone which is present just in front of the heart is called as sternum, isn't it? So the ribs which are present towards the lateral sides and the sternum which is present towards the ventral side, they are elevated. They are lifted upward. They are lifted upward because of the contraction of the external intercostal muscles. They contract. As a result of this contraction, what happens? The sternum and the ribs are elevated. When they are elevated, what happens? It is increased in the dorsoventral axis. This is the antero-posterior axis. This is the anterior. This is the posterior, isn't it? For example, this is the anterior. This is the anterior, and this is the posterior. Vertical axis. Because of this diaphragmatic muscles here contraction, this vertical axis is increased. This one's. Whereas the contraction of these external intercostal muscles, they contract. As a result, this is a ventral side, this is a ventral side, and this is a dorsal side, isn't it? So this axis, originally this is a position, so it becomes like this here. It becomes like this. That is dorsoventral axis. Dorsoventral axis is increased because of the contraction of the external intercostal muscles. Overall, what happens? The thoracic volume is increased here. The thoracic volume or thoracic area is increased. So I told you already that much of the thorax is occupied by the lungs. Much of the thoracic cavity is occupied by the lungs. If there is any change in the thoracic cavity, it is reflected in the lungs also. Because much part of the thoracic cavity is filled with the lungs. If there is any change in the thoracic cavity is there, it is reflected in the lung cavity itself. Here, what is the conclusion? The thoracic cavity area or volume is increasing. Because the thoracic area or volume is increasing, the lung volume, that is pulmonary volume, is also increasing here. How this happens? I'll explain to you. Okay? For example, this is a lung. And I told you that two pleura are there. One is the outer pleura called as parietal pleura, and inner one is called as a visceral pleura. Visceral pleura here. And what is this one? This is the rest of the chest cavity here, chest lining, thoracic lining. This one's. This is a lung. Entire thing is a lung, and this is a lung layer. Outer layer is called as parietal pleura. Inner one is called as visceral pleura. This is increased now. I told you. Because this is increased, what happens? The parietal pleura is also increased here like this. The parietal pleura is also increased, and the visceral pleura is also increased. The serous pleura here. The serous pleura is also increased, and the parietal pleura is also increased here. Both the pleura increasing, as a result, this lung volume is also increased here. That is, when the thoracic volume is increased, the lung volume is also increased. That is, area of the lung is increased or decreased now. The area of the lung or volume of the lung is increased. What is the conclusion here? When the area is inversely proportional to the pressure, here area is increased. That is, pressure is decreased here. When the area is increased, here the pressure is decreased. The pressure inside which one? Lungs. The pressure inside the lungs is called as which one? I told you just now, intrapulmonary pressure. Intrapulmonary pressure is decreased here. The pressure inside the lungs is decreased. That is, there is a negative pressure inside the lungs. There is a negative pressure inside the lungs. When compared to which one? Atmosphere. When compared to the atmosphere, the pressure inside the lungs is lesser. So according to diffusion, what is that? The gas has to move from the region of the higher levels to the region of the lower level here. Where is higher here? Atmosphere. Oxygen is more. Oxygen concentration is now more in the atmosphere and the oxygen concentration is less in the lungs. So the oxygen has to move from atmosphere into the lungs, and that is called as the inhalation or inspiration here. Very simple here. When you understand this one, is easy here. That is, area is increased. The pressure is decreased. What is the pressure here? Intrapulmonary pressure. The pressure inside the lungs when compared to the atmosphere is lesser. There is a negative pressure maintained inside the lungs. There is a pressure gradient. What is the gradient here? Pressure difference between the atmosphere and the lungs. Because of which, based on the diffusion of gases, oxygen diffuses from the higher, that is atmosphere, into the lower, that is lungs. That is called as the inspiration. Bachcho. This is very simple. Okay. I'll explain here graphically now. So, inspiration or inhalation, the phrenic muscles of diaphragm contract. They contract. Because they contract, what happens? Diaphragm becomes flattened. Diaphragm becomes flattened. When become flattened, area, that is antero-posterior axis, also called as vertical axis, is increased. That is A, for example. This is A. And next one is B. The second one involved is the external intercostal muscles. External intercostal muscles of ribs. They also contract. Contraction of these external intercostal muscles of ribs. When they contract, what happens? The ribs and sternum both are elevated. That is raised. Because of the elevation, area in the dorsoventral axis. Dorsoventral axis is increased. So what is the net result of this one and this one? The thoracic volume is increased. When the thoracic volume is increased, the pulmonary volume is also increased here. Because much part of the thorax is occupied by the lungs. So when the thoracic volume is increased, the pulmonary volume is also increased here. When the area is increased, the pressure is decreased. That is, intrapulmonary pressure is lesser because area is more here. So intrapulmonary pressure is lesser even compared to the atmosphere. So based on diffusion, oxygen has to move from atmosphere into the lungs, and that is called as the inspiration. It's very simple. Clear? Now here, all of you see here, I told you that diaphragm and ribs, here intercostal muscles, that is phrenic muscles are contributing and external intercostal muscles are contributing, but this diaphragm contributes almost roughly 75% of this breathing here, inhalation, 75% here. That is more is contributed by the diaphragm itself here, phrenic muscles of diaphragm. Next one is expiration, exactly opposite of events here. Whichever is there here, phrenic muscles of diaphragm, they relax. Here contract now, here they relax, and the diaphragm moves to the original position. Moves to original position. What is original position? The flat shaped one. The flat shaped one again becomes dome shaped here. That is, area is now decreased in the antero-posterior axis or vertical axis. Here, the area is increased in the antero-posterior axis because the diaphragm is becoming flattened because of the contraction of which one? Phrenic muscles. Here, what happens? Because the phrenic muscles are relaxed, the diaphragm comes back to the original position. As a result, the area is decreased here. Antero-posterior axis or vertical axis is decreased. The vertical here, increased here, decreased. That's the difference here. Now this is A for example, and here is a B here. And external intercostal muscles of ribs here contract. Here after contraction they relax. After contraction they relax here. Because the relaxation of these external intercostal muscles of ribs, the ribs and sternum are lowered here. Ribs and sternum are lowered here. Here elevated and here lowered. That is what is lowering here? Coming back to the original position. That is called as lowering here. Here there is the change in position, elevated. But because the relaxation, the ribs and sternum comes back to the original position. That's called as here lowering bacho. Next one is as a result of this one, the dorsoventral axis. Dorsoventral axis here is increased, whereas here decreased. Decreased here. So overall, what is the net result of this one? Here decreased. This axis is decreased. This axis is decreased here, and this axis is also decreased here. Overall, the total thoracic volume is decreased. Here increased now, thoracic volume is increased, whereas here the thoracic volume is decreased here. When the thoracic volume is decreased, it is reflected in the pulmonary volume also. That is, pulmonary volume is decreased here. The lung volume is decreased. So according to here, what is that? When the area is here decreased and the pressure is increased, that is, area is inversely proportional to pressure, isn't it? So here the area is decreasing, so the pressure is increasing. When the pressure is increasing, what is the pressure increasing here? Intrapulmonary pressure is increasing. When compared to which one? Atmosphere. Basing on diffusion of gases, the lungs, which contains the carbon dioxide, more pressure is present in the lungs. So, basing on this diffusion, carbon dioxide goes out from the lungs into the atmosphere. Why? Because the intrapulmonary pressure, where the lungs here, carbon dioxide in the lungs, intrapulmonary pressure is more when compared to the atmospheric pressure of the carbon dioxide. That is, atmosphere contains lesser carbon dioxide, whereas the lungs contains more carbon dioxide. The pressure is more in the lungs. That's why, basing on diffusion of gases here, the carbon dioxide goes out from the lungs into the atmosphere, and that is nothing but here expiration or exhalation. But show it's very simple now. What is there in it? That is it. Please remember this point. That's it. And diffusion, everything is gone. That's it, isn't it? So this contraction now. Here contraction. Here contraction of these muscles here. When you contract, simple exercise here. All of you try here, all try. All of you try. Touch here like this. Contraction. That is, you are utilizing the energy. You are utilizing the energy in the form of ATP here, in adenosine triphosphate. So this contraction is always an active process. Contraction is an active process here. That's why the inspiration is an active process, whereas relaxation is a which one? Passive process. Passive process. That is, expiration is also a passive process here. So overall, what is the bottom line? Inspiration, active process; expiration, passive process. Okay, students, it's very simple, isn't it? So that's all about the mechanism of breathing. Okay, students, all of you. Bye, students.